ينشر الهدي إيمانا وموعظة فبالجهالة قد خابت مساعينا غابت مناقبنا واسود حاضرنا غابت مناقبنا واسود حاضرنا وأوشك اليأس أن يغشى أمانينا.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome to another edition of the Sulaiman Ravat Show this Friday evening. We're coming to you live from our studios here in Sunny Hill, Johannesburg. Another week has passed, can you believe it? Just last week, and it feels like it was just a few days ago. Well, it was a few days ago, but doesn't feel like a full week, does it? We were in studio here, we had Maulana Ibrahim Bam. The set was a little different. This table was facing the other way. I was sitting on the one side, Maulana Bam was on the other side, and we had Maulana Karan in our Cape Town studios, and we were talking about moon sighting. Well, tonight I'm going solo, flying solo, sailing solo, whatever you want to call it, but not altogether solo. I may be speaking alone in studio, but I know that there are thousands, if not millions of viewers out there. So I'm in a lot of company, alhamdulillah. Many people meet me out there in the street, in masjids, in shopping centers, in different places. And they say to me, Maulana, you're always talking to us, but we never get opportunity to talk to you. And today we have an opportunity to talk to you. Or we hear you and we see you, but you don't hear us and you don't see us. Yeah, that's the privilege of being on media platforms. And we thank Allah wa ta'ala for that. Cold, chilly evening here in the Johannesburg area, I understand in most parts of the country. Cold front. Hopefully, this is winter making al-wida now. This is winter saying farewell and goodbye. 2 Fridays ago, it was nice and warm. It was almost like a summer's day. And I was saying to the wife that we haven't even really gone into spring yet, and we're experiencing this kind of warm weather. And it was actually a Friday, I remember clearly, because from there we came to ITV. She was with me that Friday here at the ITV studios, and I didn't even have a jacket on in the evening. And I said to her that don't worry, that cold front will come back to bite. We'll have to take out the heavy-duty jackets. It happens every year. Actually, we're still in August, and sometimes well into September, you still have a cold front. But these weather patterns come from Allah wa ta'ala. There's so much that we need to be grateful for. Whether it's cold or whether it's hot, we have the amenities, we have the facilities, we have the luxuries, not just the facilities, to to comfort ourselves against these weather conditions. I was doing a story. I did an interview actually with a representative of Human Rights Watch with regards a report that they released earlier this week, and it talks about manual scavengers in India. And the reason I share this story with you is to highlight to us how much there is that we need to be grateful over. Many times we get so caught up in what we don't have and what's lacking in our lives and what we feel left out from, that we forget to focus on how much we do have and how lucky we are, and how many people there are out there who are so much less fortunate than we are. Now, manual scavenging in India, if you don't know what it's all about, basically it means that there's this caste, the Dalit caste. They used to be previously called the untouchables in India. And they are considered to be so low. Some of them are Hindu, many of them are Muslims. You find them in different parts of India. And they used to be considered to be so low that people used to feel that they cannot do any job in the villages except to clean dry toilets, except to clean toilets that don't flush, put toilets. So they would have to go from a very young age in life to the houses of the more affluent people, to the homes of the richer people in the communities, and for a living, they would have to clean toilets. That was the only thing that they would do. That was their lives. And I read, in preparation for that interview, I read about the story of a young girl who mentions that from the age of 10, her mother said to her, my daughter, this is our life. In order to earn your bread, this is what you have to do. And she mentions, and it makes your stomach turn. She talks about how the first time she had to do it and she couldn't take the smell. And as she approached the waste matter, she slipped and her whole leg went into the waste matter and she couldn't take it and she started to throw up. And she had to get used to it very quickly because that's how you earn your living. And she spoke about how she had to do this every day in and day out. What kind of a life, you ask yourself? What kind of a life? And after a while, she started getting sick. Her hair started falling out. She used to smell. These people used to pay her with a roti. For those who don't know what's a roti, it's a round piece of bread that Indian people make. And because she used to smell, and all these people who do this kind of work, they would naturally smell, they wouldn't let you come too close to them. You must stand at a distance, and they throw the roti at you. And she says, I just couldn't take this kind of life anymore. I thought to myself, how do I live like this? And in India, after a while, they actually passed a law against it. This, dealing with human waste matter, manual scavenging, as they call it there. There's a law against it. You're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to employ people to do it. But still, they force these people to do it because they feel that these people are so low in society, these Dalits, they previously used to call them the untouchables, that they must do this kind of work. And if it's not cleaning dry toilets, then they must clean the drains and the sewers and the gutters. It's an economic issue on one hand, because in many parts of India, they don't have flush toilets. And there is a campaign ongoing, Clean India, where they're trying to upgrade facilities and ensure that they have these flush toilets, etc. But the point I want to make is that it's got to do with discrimination, obviously, and people's mindset. But look at these people and the kind of lives that they have to live. I read in that same report that many of the trains there, they have pit toilets on the train. Now, you and I, if we go, I've been to India. I traveled from Delhi to Mumbai with the Rajdhani Express. And you don't have that kind of an experience. But if you travel in the train that perhaps the common people or the underprivileged people have to travel in, that there's a pit toilet and the waste matter falls all on the tracks and somebody has to clean it up. And these people who clean it up, what kind of a life they live? Now, the reason I was narrating all this entire story was to come back to this point, that there's so much that we need to be grateful for. Sometimes we just need to sit back and think, Ya Allah, what are the issues over which I complain? What are the issues that I allow to get me depressed? And then when I look at it in the broader scheme of things, 2 weeks ago, we spoke about the people of Gaza. We dedicated our entire program to talk about the people of Gaza. Earlier this afternoon, I was at the Apartheid Museum. I met Sheikh Abdul Salam Daif. He was the foreign minister for the Taliban government at the time of the American invasion of Afghanistan. And he was betrayed by the Musharraf government, and he was given over to US authorities, and he was sent to Guantanamo Bay. And he spoke about his experiences there and what they went through, the torture, the difficulty, being separated away from their families. And, he talks about having to live with that pain, that sense of betrayal. I mean, he had diplomatic status. He was a foreign minister in that country. He was an ambassador in that particular country. And he was given over. He had done absolutely nothing wrong. He was treated as a criminal. He was accused of being a terrorist until much later when his name was cleared. Then he was on a travel blacklist. And now his name is cleared and he's currently in our country. He's addressing a congregation as we speak, cage prisoners, this organization that assists those who are illegally detained in Guantanamo Bay. They are opening an office in Africa, and Yvonne Ridley is also at that particular event at the Apartheid Museum. I had the honor of interviewing her this morning, a very polished woman, and she made a very telling point, perhaps something that we need to discuss in one of our future programs. She said, luckily, when I was in Afghanistan, I was captured by the Taliban and not by ISIS. The Taliban dealt with me very compassionately. They actually showed me the side of Islam that brought me to the deen and made me revert to Islam. Had I been captured by ISIS, they probably would have beheaded me and I wouldn't have been speaking to you today. Nonetheless, when you listen to Mullah Abdul Salam Daif, as he was known then, and now they refer to him more as Sheikh Abdul Salam, and you look at the man's life story and you listen to the difficulties that they went through, and he says, what I went through is nothing. What my people went through is far worse. Then you say to yourself, oh Allah, there's so much that I need to be grateful for. So let's think about it, for a moment. Let it sink in that we all have our difficulties and we all have our challenges. We all have our hardships in life, but we shouldn't allow that to overwhelm us. We should always look at those who have so much more to deal with, so much more on their plate, more than we can even imagine. things that would totally cripple us. And yet, petty little things when when they don't go right for us, when we don't manage to obtain them, then we feel really deflated, and we feel dejected, and we feel that, you know what, life is being unfair to me. We shouldn't be so ungrateful to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. For this evening's program, we're going to go back to our normal format. And when I say normal format, it's been a very long time since we've had the normal format. So just to remind the listeners, we normally start with a supplication, and then we look at Hadith for the week, and then a few verses from the Quran, and then we look into the Seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a marital tip for the week, and then we conclude with a Sunnah for the week. Today we'll be talking about others being safe from the actions of your tongue and from the actions of your hands. That will be the discussion when we talk about a hadith. Then also when we talk about tafseer, we look at a verse of the Quran, a verse from Surah Imran, where Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala talks about having hope in the midst of great despondency. Having hope in the midst of great despondency. When we look at the Seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we pick up the discussion from where we left off a few months ago, and we talk about the marriage of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's father Abdullah to his mother Amina. In our marital discussion for this week, we talk about the first night. Marriage season is about to get underway. The so-called marriage season, like that, people get married all the time. But there are certain months of the year when weddings take place in abundance, because it's more conducive, The summer months, halls are more available, the weather is better, and people like to have their weddings in that particular time. And we're moving into that particular time now, and hence I want to talk about that. And finally, we continue talking about entertaining guests when we take a look at our Sunnah for the week just before we wrap up, inshallah. So that is a bit of an idea as to what you can look forward to during the course of this evening's program.
فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته.
Welcome back. You are watching the Sulaiman Ravat Show live from our studios in Sunning Hill this Friday evening. We move on to our hadith discussion now. The first hadith that we want to discuss for this evening is a hadith from Nasa'i Sharif. And Abi Hurairah radiyallahu anhu قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم المؤمن من أمنه الناس على دمائهم وأموالهم رواه النسائي. Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "The believer is one from whom people are safe in respect to their lives and wealth." The believer is one from whom people are safe in respect to their lives and wealth. Meaning, the true believer is that person that others are safe when it comes to their wealth and when it comes to their lives. People's lives are not at risk. You are not a person who treats people's lives lightly. One point I want to make. Normally, when we talk about putting other people's lives at risk, then we would think about murder, and that's natural. And I'll get to that in a moment. We'll think about, assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm. That's a technical term, but we understand it. But what about being reckless on the roads? That's something that, we rarely think about, but we need to think about more often. When you're reckless on the road, you are actually putting your own life in jeopardy, the life of those people who are with you in the car, and the life of other road users. There could be an innocent person who's driving, obeying the rules of the road, being very, very responsible in how they are driving. And here you come wanting to be the schumacher of that particular highway, and next minute you capsize and you move across lanes and you take somebody else's life. We know that death is decreed, and we know whatever happens is decreed, but it doesn't mean that you are not responsible. And it doesn't mean that what you did was not irresponsible, and that you will not be held accountable by Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. So people's lives and people's wealth should be safe from your ill doings, from your wrongdoings. And each one of us should not judge the next man. When we listen to a hadith of this nature, we should judge ourselves. Then how is it when, as far as the people with whom I interact, are their lives in jeopardy? We heard about the reports in the last week or so, people who have ideological differences. Unfortunately, approaching prominent scholars and wanting to get physical and banging on cars and chasing cars and inflammatory YouTube videos and calling for people to be beheaded, for prominent scholars to be beheaded, and that kind of thing. Where do we get this from? Yes, there's no doubt. If anyone genuinely showed disrespect to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sahaba stood very firm in that regard. But remember, you don't take only one principle of the deen and apply it selectively. Deen has many principles, and you got to apply all of those principles, and you got to see which one applies more in that particular context. Firstly, did that person perhaps say something in a way which was inappropriate but did not intend to be disrespectful? You need to seek clarification. That is also a sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Even when these punitive measures that are implemented, there has to be a structure that is in place first for those punitive measures to be implemented. Islam does not endorse kangaroo courts. Islam does not endorse street court justice. So we need to understand these things. What kind of message do we send to our youngsters? What kind of message do we send to non-Muslims if this is how we start to behave? Differing opinions, differences in ideology, they always has been and they always will be. But when we start to resort to extreme mechanisms and measures to highlight our differences and to impose our viewpoints on others, that's when the ummah is in trouble. That's when the ummah is in trouble. And you don't need the majority to be the perpetrators. You only need a small group of people to be the perpetrators. Whether it is by hijacking the names of institutions to then try and superimpose your own view, whether it's regarding moon sighting or whatever else, whether it's becoming physical, whether it's inciting people to violence, what are we then waiting for? What next? This is something that we need to be concerned about. And as I mentioned last week and the week before, that we as Muslims, ordinary Muslims in South Africa, we need to take a stand. We need to say, listen, we understand that different people will see things differently and there will be differing viewpoints. But we as the Muslims of South Africa want to make it very clear and we want to make it known that we will not tolerate anyone resorting to extreme measures in making their viewpoints known and resorting to extreme measures in dealing with these differences of opinion. The Ummah cannot afford it, and we as the Muslim community of South Africa will not accept it. We will not tolerate it. So, people need to be safe from you in as far as their wealth is concerned, in as far as their lives are concerned. Today, when you listen to how one Muslim does another Muslim down, it's become such a common occurrence. It's sad. It's sad to hear Muslim people say, I'd rather deal with a non-Muslim. I'd rather do business with a non-Muslim. That today, I can't even trust a Muslim brother. It's really sad to hear Muslim people talk like that. If our own people are talking like that, imagine what non-Muslims are saying. There used to be a time in this very land of ours, in this very country, South Africa, when a non-Muslim judge would accept without reservation the testimony of a Muslim, because a Muslim will not lie, a Muslim will not deceive, a Muslim will not cheat. And today, despite all the hallmarks of piety, despite all the hallmarks of compliance to the deen, we still are not compliant to the principles of fairness and to the principles of justice when it comes to our business matters. Even the educated amongst us, even the so-called pious amongst us, our inheritance affairs are, not in order. Our business affairs are not in order. Our business dealings are not in order. This is incorrect. Then the second hadith that I wanted to discuss for this evening, and Abdullah ibn Amr radiyallahu anhuma, عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: المسلم من سلم المسلمون من لسانه ويده والمهاجر من هجر ما نهى الله عنه رواه البخاري. Abdullah bin Amr bin As radiyallahu anhuma narrates that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, a Muslim is the one from whose tongue and hands other Muslims are safe, And a muhajir, an immigrant, is the one who abandons all that which Allah has forbidden. All that which Allah has forbidden. Now, here again, who is a true Muslim? One from whose hands and tongue other people are safe. You're not assaulting. Today, people are so quick in rolling up their sleeves and wanting to get physical. Children fight in the masjid, and the father becomes like a kid, or the two fathers become like kids. They want to roll up their sleeves. The kids are fighting in kindergarten, and the mothers want to roll up their sleeves and get into a cat fight. And then the tongue. You know, again, let's not judge other people. Let's introspect. Let's ask ourselves the question, to what extent are other people safe from my tongue? In terms of backbiting, slandering, talking evil, gossiping. How much don't I injure people, their reputations, their profile, their sensitivities, their emotions with my tongue? How I talk to people, how I address people, how I resolve difficulties, how I resolve differences, how I approach situations. This tongue can have us flung into the fire of Jahannam. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, a true Muslim is that person, others are safeguarded from his hands and they are safeguarded from his tongue. وَالْمُهَاجِرُ مَنْ هَجَرَ مَا نَهَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُ. One muhajir is that person who leaves one place to go to another for the pleasure of Allah, so that he can practice his deen more freely. But a muhajir is also that person who abandons all that which Allah has forbidden. An emigrant or an immigrant is the person who has to abandon his homeland, who has to abandon his place of birth for the pleasure of Allah. If you don't have to do that, you can get the reward of a muhajir by abandoning sin, leaving out sin, making hijrah from a life of disobedience towards a life of obedience. Leaving a life of disobedience and going towards a life of obedience. Leaving the lifestyle of shaitan and making hijrat towards the lifestyle prescribed by Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. So what we need to do is we need to ask ourselves these questions. To what extent are others safe from the wrongs of my hands, from the wrongs of my tongue, and from the wrongs of my thoughts, from the wrongs of what is in my heart? We're going to go for a break, but whilst we are, taking that break, think about it for a moment, contemplate, reflect, until we come back and we discuss further. Just absorb, introspect. When we listen, let's not take what we are hearing and what's being told and what's being discussed and judge the next person. Let's listen and internalize it and introspect on it and see how we can better ourselves. May Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala grant us the understanding.
فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته شك اليأس أن يغشى أمانينا.
Welcome back. We now continue with our Tafseer discussion. Today I have selected a verse from Surah Al-Imran where Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala makes reference to Sahaba just after the Battle of Uhud. Now we know what happened at the time of Uhud. We know that Sahaba had initially tasted success. The odds were stacked against them. Like in Badr, they were once again outnumbered. En route to Uhud, what had happened was that many of the hypocrites had pulled out, so their numbers were now even less, and they looked smaller. Yet when they got to Uhud, they managed to inflict a very heavy blow on the Meccan army, on the mushrikeen and the polytheists, who then fled. And the Nabi of Allah had seen a very strategic location, that hilltop, and he had placed those archers there because he didn't want any rearguard action. And those archers, as we know, misunderstanding, thinking that the battle was over, they came down. Khalid bin Walid radiallahu an, who at that time was not a Muslim, he saw an opportunity. They attacked the Muslims from behind, who at that time, who were now, in a moment of celebration. They thought that, they had already conquered or they had already been victorious, and they were caught totally by surprise. And the Meccan army had managed to inflict a severe difficulty upon the Muslims. Approximately 70 Sahaba had passed away, including the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Hamza radiallahu anhu. Now, understand the psyche of the Sahaba at that particular time. They were caught by surprise. Now, one is you winning, and then whilst you're winning, next minute you get a setback out of the blue. That is more difficult to handle than when you were on the back foot from the word go. Not that we can compare it, but to give you a sporting analogy, you were losing from the word go. And that's one situation. Another situation is that you were 8-0 up, and next minute you 9-8 behind, something like that. And that's more difficult to deal with, psychologically. That's one. Secondly, so many Sahaba had passed away. So many of them had lost near and dear ones. Thirdly, Hamza radiallahu anhu's loss and the way his body was disfigured and mutilated and the pain that caused to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sahaba seeing the Nabi of Allah going through so much pain, it had a psychological impact. Fourthly, they felt very guilty because they felt two things. Number one, the Nabi of Allah initially had wanted to stay in Medina. But the young amongst the Sahaba, those who were full of vigor, those who had fire in their bellies, especially those who didn't participate in Badr, they were so excited and enthusiastic. They said, no, let's go out and let's meet them. So the Nabi of Allah then finally acceded to their request. Now they started feeling guilty, that maybe we should have listened to the Nabi of Allah and we should have stayed. B, those who were on the hilltop, they started feeling guilty. Why did we come down? We should have waited for instruction. And so there were all the physical pains, there were the emotional scars which were far worse, and on top of all of this, they get word that the Meccan army may be taking a U-turn. The Meccan army has heard that they are injured, their Nabi is injured, psychologically they are scarred, and maybe there's a chance now of totally finishing them off. In this state of great difficulty and great despondency, what does Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala say to the Sahaba? Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala says, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Do not become weak and do not grieve. You will ascend and you will overpower and you will be victorious once again, providing you become true believers. Providing you become true believers. إِيَمْسَسْكُمْ قَرْحٌ فَقَدْ مَسَّ الْقَوْمَ قَرْحٌ مِثْلُهُ. Yes, if you are suffering some injury, then they are also suffering similar injuries. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. These days of victory, it alternates between people. You lose one day, you're victorious the other day. In English they say, you lose some, you win some. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala then says that Allah sometimes makes you lose to test you, and sometimes He makes you win to test you also. In the end, it all depends on who's a true believer. So at this moment of great turmoil, when they're feeling deflated, dejected, when they're feeling despondent, when they're feeling angry with themselves. In life, people can disappoint you. And when people disappoint you, it hurts. But the greatest hurt is when you disappoint yourself. The greatest hurt is not when somebody else lets you down. The greatest hurt is when you let yourself down. And the greatest psychological issue that Sahaba were dealing with at that particular moment is that they had let themselves down. And Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala says, listen, you made a mistake. I'm not going to trivialize it. But I'm saying to you, don't let it overwhelm you. Don't let your slip up make you drown in your sorrows now. Don't throw a pity party. Islam doesn't believe in that. Islam says you fell, you got dirty, stand up, dust yourself off, and start moving. Start moving. وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. You want to now achieve? Become true believers. Become true believers. So the ummah today, we are hurting. We see what has happened in Gaza. We see what's happening in Iraq. We see what's happening in Syria. We see, this whole thing with ISIS. There's a lot of ambiguity. It's difficult for us to comment either way. But I'll tell you this much. What's happening is the very noble concept of khilafat, the very pure concept of an Islamic khilafat. A khilafat in Islam has got to do with justice, peace, fairness. It's being stigmatized. The word khilafat and the concept of khilafat now is being portrayed in such a way that Muslims are starting to feel shy to utter the word because of the context in which this word is being used now and how all of this is playing itself out. And non-Muslims are starting to see the portrayal of khilafat in a way that's got to do with the killing of women and children and the beheading of people, everything in the negative sense. So, Khilafat, something which is so noble and something which can bring so much of goodness to the world, is being stigmatized, is being demonized. But in the midst of all of this, there's hope. Allah Ta'ala says, do not grieve, do not become weak, do not allow setbacks to keep you down. You're going to fall in life, you have to fall. You win some, you lose some. But as long as you get up and you continue to try. This does not only have to do with regards to warfare. This is a general principle in life. You know, in English they say, if you fail, try again. Allah Ta'ala is telling it to us in a much more eloquent way. That if you have failed in a big way, pick yourself up. Turn to Allah. If you become a true believer, there is no problem bigger than Allah. And there is no solution better than Allah. There is no problem bigger than Allah, and there is no solution better than Allah. So turn to Allah. Become a true believer. And when you become a true believer, there is no problem, emotional problem, psychological problem, a spiritual problem that's too great for you to overcome. And you will achieve, you will excel, you will reach your goal, inshallah. If that is the plan and that is the will of Allah Ta'ala, just make the effort, remain positive, and keep your focus on Allah Ta'ala. We go for a break. When we come back from the break, inshallah, we move on to our Seerah discussion, and we will be discussing the marriage of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's parents.
فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته شك اليأس أن يغشى أمانينا.
Welcome back. We move on to our Seerah discussion now. We talk about the marriage of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's parents. We already discussed a bit of the life story of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's father Abdullah. We spoke about the meaning of his name. Abdullah meaning the servant of Allah. And we discussed the Hadith, which talks about the most closest of names to Allah Ta'ala. We said the greatest of all names is Abdullah, because the greatest of all Allah's names is Allah. And Allah likes names that show servitude. So any name that shows servitude is beloved to Allah. Abdul Rahman, Abdul Khaliq, Abdul Razzaq, Abdul Basit. But Abdullah is most liked because it's attached to the most beloved and the greatest of all Allah Ta'ala's names. And the scholars of the opinion that after Allah, the greatest name is Rahman. قُلِ ادْعُوا اللَّهَ أَوْ ادْعُوا الرَّحْمَنِ. And that Abdul Muttalib was inspired to name his son Abdullah. Then we also spoke about what happened in his initial life and how his life had to be ransomed with all those camels after the dream that his father saw and after the vow that his father had taken. Now when he was about marriageable age, and in those days they used to get married somewhat early. Some scholars have written he was as young as 18. His father sent a proposal to Medina Munawwara. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's maternal grandparents were from Madinatul Munawwara, and he sent a proposal for the daughter of Wahab bin Abd Manaf from the well-known Banu Zuhra tribe. And he sent the proposal for the hand of Amina for his son Abdullah. And Amina was at the time under the guardianship of her uncle Wuhayb. And Wuhayb also had a daughter. The daughter's name was Hala, and Hala was naturally Amina's cousin. And Abdul Muttalib got married simultaneously. He sent a proposal for Amina for his son Abdullah, and for Amina's cousin Hala for himself. This was not out of the ordinary in those times. They both got married at the same time, father and son in the same ceremony. Can you imagine that? Imagine that happening today and how tongues will wag. Whoa, hey, father and son got married at the same time, and to two cousins. But that's how it happened. Abdul Muttalib got married to this woman, Hala, and Abdullah got married to Amina. And from Hala, Abdul Muttalib had a son, Hamza radiyallahu an, the great Hamza radiyallahu an, with regards to whom we just spoke. And hence he became the milk brother. He was also the paternal uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was also the milk brother of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they grew up together. Now Abdullah bin Abbas radiyallahu anhuma mentions a very interesting story, that when Abdul Muttalib took his son Abdullah and they left Mecca for Medina for the marriage ceremony, they came across a Jewish woman by the name of Fatima bint Mur. And she was very well versed with the Torah and the Injil. And when she saw Abdullah, she saw the nur of Nubuwah radiating from his face. So she called him one side and she told him, listen, I will compensate you. I'll give you 100 camels if you will be intimate with me. Imagine a woman coming to a man and saying, I'll give you R1,000,000 to sleep with me. This is what Fatima said. And Abdullah, in poetry form, very eloquently told her that he fears Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and he will not do that. Anyway, he continued and he went to Madinatul Munawwara. He went to Medina, he got married, he spent 3 days with his new bride, and now he was returning back to Mecca. And en route, he meets the same woman, Fatima. And this time she calls him and she says, where did you go and what happened? He says, you know what happened? I went to Medina, I married Amina, and I spent 3 days with her. She said, exactly, because that nur of Nubuwah has been now transferred to her belly. We'll take a break. When we come back, we continue the story.
بالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته كاليأس أن يغشى أمانينا.
Welcome back. My apologies for that. So when they came back, Abdullah on his way to Madinatul Munawwara, he was, he was surprised when this woman called him one side and she said to him that I'll pay you 100 camels. 100 camels is a lot of money. And he said that, a lot of wealth. And he said, she said, I'll pay you 100 camels. Be intimate with me. And he obviously refused and he thought, I mean, what a woman. He went on to Medina, got married, spent some time with his wife, was intimate with his wife. And now he was on his way back to Makkah. He meets the same Fatima. And she tells him, I sense a difference. What happened? He said, well, I went to Medina, I got married, and I spent time with my wife, and I'm now on my way back home. She said, you got married. You know what? Let me tell you, I'm not a loose woman. I'm not a woman with loose morals. I'm not an unchaste woman. I was just so desperate. I'm an educated woman. I know the Torah and Injil. I saw that Nubuwah, that the nur of Nubuwah was within you. It was going to be transferred. And I wanted it to be transferred into me. And that's why I wanted you to be intimate with me. Out of desperation, I made an obviously impermissible request and I apologize for that. Now, inshallah, in our next discussion, we will talk further and I'll talk about the demise of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's father, Abdullah. We don't have much time, so I want to move on to the next feature, and that is our marital tip for this week. I did mention that we're moving now towards that part of the year where more couples will be getting married and so-called marriage season. And I want to talk about the first night. Now, I know I'm not going to go into the etiquettes of the first night because then you'll have to put a big notice on your screen, PG-18 or maybe 21, I don't know. And maybe the screen will start getting missed. And, you need maybe those who are watching the program, their lenses will also get a bit misty on a lighter note. But those things you can read up in the relevant books, and you should. You mustn't leave it for right the night before. Now you're reading the book, or you're only reading it at the actual moment. Educate yourself ahead of time. But there's just one or two things I want to mention. The first thing is that we need to understand that in the process that leads up to the first night, sometimes the husband especially, and husband and wife feel that intimacy has to take place on the first night. Intimacy has to take place on the first night. Now, it just depends. Sometimes the wife may be from a particular place, the nikah takes place there, and now they travel a fair distance to go to the husband's place. They reach there, 12, 1 o'clock at night, and now the husband is expecting to be intimate. And the wife, firstly, it's, especially for a virgin woman, it's not an easy time. There's a lot of anxiety, there's a bit of fear, there's an apprehension. And now what happens is on top of it, there's tiredness, there's fatigue, you're in a totally new environment, you're not used to the bed, you're not used to the room, you're not used to the bathroom, and this person feels, no, excuse me, I'll actually get extra reward now if intimacy takes place on the first night. It doesn't have to be that way. It just doesn't have to be that way. Understand this for this week. Inshallah, next week we will take the discussion further. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. As you can see, my throat is also giving me a bit of a difficult time this evening. But to wrap up this particular point, I wanted to mention that husband needs to understand, and the wife also needs to understand that it's not compulsory, and the husband needs to be accommodating in this regard, and needs to say to the wife, look, I understand there may have been, you may have been rushing and trying to wrap up a lot of things in that week leading into the wedding, husband's family getting ready for the walima, the wife getting the trousseau things ready, packing up the things, last minute things, getting this and that. And now a lot of excitement building up, and you come into this event, and what happens then is that, on that particular night, it's maybe not ideal for intimacy. You got your whole life to be physical, get to know one another a little bit. I'm not saying prolong it now for too long, because now, alhamdulillah, you're halal for one another. So don't prolong it for too long, but at the same time, there's absolutely no need to rush. There's absolutely no need to rush. So take it easy. All those who are about to get married, and those of you who are married, well, if you rushed, you rushed. But those who you are going to advise, tell them not to rush. That brings us to the end of another edition of the Sulaiman Ravat Show. Until we meet again, we request that you keep us in your du'as. Keep the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in your du'as as well. Until next time, fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
فاستنهضي همما فالمسجد الأقصى ما زال يدعونا ندي على الفتية الأحرار في زمن أضحى به الحق بالخذلان مدفونا فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته وهل لغير القوي الناس يصغونا رباه هيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا فأنت من بالتقى والدين يهدينا أدعوك يا أمتي فاستنهضي همما فالمسجد الأقصى ما زال يدعونا ندي على الفتية الأحرار في زمن أضحى به الحق